Good morning, Shavua Tov. We continue our story on Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Ashkenazi, or better known as the Chacham Tzvi, which we began last week. And just to make a short recap of where do we stand. So the Chacham Tzvi was born in 6058 in Moravia, which is nowadays Czechoslovakia, but back then it was part of the Ottoman Empire, as we spoke at length. And while he was from a very Ashkenazic background, he was educated in Sephardic yeshivot, which made him very aware of the different minhagim and the different methods of learning. And also, as I explained, made him a very good candidate to be considered as the first modern age rabbi, as being very, he was, as he traveled a lot through the world, he was also well aware of the advances in technology, in science, and in new languages, as we would speak, that all of that would play a big role in the rest of his life. Now, he was married once, and his wife and young daughter died during a war, and then he was remarried to the daughter of the Rav of the communities called Ahu. Ahu is Rashi Tevot of Altona, Hamburg, and Württemberg. And these were three cities in North Germany that were united in the Rabbanut. As I said, that's a good way to both save money and also not have your rabbi on your head all the time because he's traveling around. So they were united, they were hiring the rabbi together. And his father-in-law, as I said, was the Rav there. So for 18 years, which I described as maybe, meaning no one asked me, but I'm offering my opinion that these were from the best of his life. He was sitting in a yeshiva, he had the kollel there, completely financed by the community. It was under a contract, they had to finance it, and he had students, and his students adored him, and he was just having the good life. He was learning Torah. It's like a Gan Eden. So he was learning Torah, teaching Torah, sending tshuvot throughout the world. Everything was beautiful. And we discussed one machloiket, one pulmus, one dispute that he was involved in, and that was the dispute of Rabbi David Nieto in England, in the Sephardic community. There was only Sephardic community in London, Shari Shamayim. So during the shiur, our English people didn't know that the shul still exists, but we checked it later. They just changed the name, but it's the oldest synagogue in London. And it was called Sha'arei Shamayim. It has a slightly different name now. And Rabbi David Nieto was the rabbi there, was from an Italian origin. So he gave a drasha about nature and God. We spoke about it at length last week, so I don't want to go into all the details again, but he was accused of a heretic conception by some people in the community, and the question was sent to the Chacham Tzvi. From here you can see it was his greatness, that people from England, and they were Sephardic, so you would assume they would send the question to a Sephardic rabbi, but no, they sent it to Chacham Tzvi, because he, as I said, was well versed in science and in the Sephardic world and in the Ashkenazic world. So he was and obviously he was a Gaon. So he was sent the question, and he decided Rabbi David Nieto was kosher. It may be that he also helped him, as I suggested last week, maybe also a little helped him to reformulate his ideas in a way that would be more acceptable. Rabbi David Nieto seized the opportunity and took as they say, took the ladder to go off the tree, and everyone was quiet, everyone was happy. So for 18 years, these were very happy times. And then his father-in-law died.
What was the heresy?
So the heresy was that Rabbi David Nieto claimed that nature and God are the same. And the question was, do you reduce God to being nature, which is heresy, or do you upgrade nature to say everything is the will of God? And that was the way that the problem was solved. Okay, so after 18 years, then we speak about 1707. Okay, so in 1707, his father-in-law dies. Everyone expected him to become the new chief rabbi of Ahu, of the three communities. But he made some enemies. And that is something that we would resurface again and again, because I described it last week, that Chacham Tzvi was not one to be quiet. When he had an opinion, he spoke his mind, and in very clear terms. He was not a diplomat, it's very clear. He was not the diplomatic type. And that's why maybe he was better as Rosh Yeshiva than as a community rabbi, which sometimes needs to be slightly more diplomatic. And he made a few enemies, and because of that, he was accepted. It's very interesting and maybe not very surprising. Hamburg and Wistenburg, these are the two communities that he was not in, they accepted him as the rabbi. But Altona, where he had the kollel and where he was, as I said, growing some enemies, so there he couldn't convince them to, he couldn't convince all of them to accept him. The city became fractured, and basically half of the community wanted him, and the second half wanted a certain Rabbi Moshe Rothenberg. And the solution in the end was Rosh Memshala Chalufi, a rotation. So the solution in the end was that he would be the rabbi of Hamburg and Wassenburg, and for Altona, then 1 year he would be the rabbi, the next year the second guy would be the rabbi, and they would rotate, and you can see where this is going to lead. All right, because obviously the other guy is not just disappearing when Chacham Tzvi is the Rav Rashi. People would still ask him. People that feel close to the second rabbi are going to ask the second rabbi. They are not going to ask Chacham Tzvi. And when these would be questions that would be relevant to the whole community, that almost for sure would create a strife, and that is exactly what happened. Now, interestingly enough, the explosion came. The straw that broke, as they say, the back of the camel, was not something that would look to us very big, but it became a great issue that almost divided all of Europe. It's a very interesting, the story is very interesting, and it is a story of the heartless chicken. What do I mean? What was the question? So a certain, as you know, back then, it's not as nowadays that chickens are being grown up in supermarkets. Back then, people would have chickens in their backyard, and they would go to the shochet. The shochet would slaughter the bird, and if there would be an halachic question, you would go to the Rav, and the Rav would say it's treif or kosher. Fine, that's the way they worked. And all the melicha, right, the salting of the meat, everything would be done at home. Maybe some of you still remember your parents doing that. But nowadays, it's art completely forgotten. Be it as it may. The story goes like that. One young lady, she was not the daughter of the house owner, which may be part of the story. She was a mesharetet, so she was a servant, but a Jewish servant, maid. So she is working on a certain nice, fat, expensive chicken. After it was slaughtered, and she's cleaning the different parts and separating. So you have the pulke, right, and you'd have the leg and everything in place. And while she's working, the pieces that are not being eaten, there is a cat beneath the table, and she's throwing to the cat the pieces of meat that are not going to be eaten. Yes, it would not be rewarded nowadays, the reward of cleanliness and hygienic, but that's the way it worked back then. So she would throw the pieces to the cat. And suddenly she realized there is no heart. The chicken is heartless. So she's taking the chicken and she is going to the Rav. This young maid is going to the Rav, not Chacham Tzvi. She's going to the local Shtibel Rav and ask him, what about the chicken? Because the chicken, without being, we should maybe say that almost every injury in the inner parts of an animal render it as treif, it's treifa, it cannot be eaten. Okay, So being without a heart seems to be a serious injury. So she goes to the Rav, and the Rav says, yes, you are right. This chicken is treif because it has no heart. And it says in the Shulchan Aruch that if the heart is missing a part, then it's treif. So if the heart missing a part is enough to make it treif, if the whole heart is missing, then it's clearly a treif chicken. Now the maid comes back to the home, and the housewife is waiting there, and she's asking, where is our chicken for Shabbat? And the maid says, I went to the rabbi, and I told him there's no heart, and he said it's treif, so I threw it out. And the housewife is mad. She's raging. She said, obviously, the heart fell from your hands, and it fell to the cat, and the cat eaten it. There is no such a thing as a chicken without a heart. But the maid insists that she was there and the chicken had nothing fell. The only thing she threw to the cat was the troll. How do you say the troll? I have no idea what's the name in English. What the name is? Gizzard. Okay, so is that eaten usually? I don't think it's eaten. So that's the only thing that she threw to the cat. All the rest, she's sure there was no heart. What do? We have a rule usually, Eid echad ne'eman b'isurin. So one witness is enough in matters of kosher and non-kosher. So you have a witness here who says what the face you're doing now is exactly what the Chacham Tzvi is going to make.
One witness is something crazy.
Exactly. And we have to remember that the girl she's going to be blamed because the heart is something that we eat. After there is a special process of koshering it, but it's edible. So she has a very big interest to claim that there was no heart to begin with. But, so the Rav said it's treif, the local Rav, fine. The housewife went to the Chacham Tzvi and said, the local Rav said it's treif, but I don't think so. And the Chacham Tzvi says, of course it's kosher. It is obvious that there was a heart and the cat eaten it. And that's the end of the story. And the chicken was fat and very much alive. So obviously it was not walking without a heart. And that's the end of the story. And it's kosher. And the whole city just erupted. Now, you think that's a not very important question, but it's touched upon a very sensitive nerve then as now, and that is the halachic status of science, because there are no clear evidence in the Gemara that an animal without a heart cannot live. It may be clear to all of us, but there is just no such a line in the Gemara. There is a line about an animal that his heart is deformed, that it cannot live for more than a year, and that is why it's called treifa. But there is nothing about something without a heart completely that completely cannot be alive. And the Chacham Tzvi did try to bring proofs when he had to defend his position. He did try to bring proofs from halacha, from the Gemara, from the Mishnah, from the Zohar about the importance of the heart. But all of these proofs in the end were artificial. And it was obvious that what he is really relying on is the new science. And there is new science. As we speak, in the beginning of the 18th century, then real scientific medicine is doing its first baby steps. And I'm sorry for the graphic details, but cadabras, this is the right word, cadabras of human beings are being dug out of their graves, and doctors are beginning to post-mortem, right, on them in order to see how exactly the body is working. And that's a very long parsha, interesting parsha by itself. Many times it was done without the permission of obviously of the dead person or his family. And it's a big thing. It's a big thing. But be it as it may, they knew that the heart is very necessary for staying alive more than, that even without the heart, some reflex can still work for a few minutes, but obviously not for a long time. And obviously it would not look like a healthy chicken. So he was obviously relying on science. can you rely on science in order to make something kosher? In order to be machmir, you can always be machmir, that's not a question.
But it's not about science, it's about logic.
Why it's logic that the heart is needed?
It's like I'll ask a question about חייזרים. Like, באמת, how do you say חייזרים?
Aliens,
So, an alien came without his hand. Can I shake his, is it a girl or a boy? Can I touch it? Like, seriously, it's not, באמת.
Okay, so we in this, I guess in this group, most of us are what is called modern Orthodox, and we accept the legitimacy of science.
It's not science, it's logic.
No, it's science. No, it's science. It's biology.
For logic, you need a basis.
Yeah, it's
and
biology.
then you can use the logic.
It's experimental.
The logic can't just come out of thin air.
You're talking about.
It's an experience.
Reality, and there's a way to figure out what's.
Yeah, but there is a way to figure it out, but it's not necessary. I mean, we could have imagined a world in which if I'm missing my heart, then my liver can somehow replace it. I mean, obviously, it's not. Don't try it at home. It doesn't work. But just we can imagine such a world, right? You need to experiment in order to know that the heart is a vital organ. Without it, you cannot function for even a few minutes. And again, it's not that the Gemara says that it is incorrect, it's just not saying that it is correct. So the question is...
It doesn't refer to it, it's like, it won't refer to, if you have a knafayim, it's like...
So you are in the Chacham Tzvi camp, but we have to accept that many rabbis were aghast at using science in order to kosher. And then just as a different reference, not very long before this incident, there was a certain rabbi, Rabbi Tzvi, who was an Italian. Now the Italians were always, the Italian rabbis are a nation to themselves, right? So they are something very special, and they were always open to the science in the Renaissance. Excuse me? The Ramchal would be later, but yes, he's part of the same. Yeah, there is a certain pattern to Italian rabbinate that we didn't speak about, I think, till now. But so this Rabbi Tzvi, he wrote an encyclopedia of halacha, the first encyclopedia by the Aleph Beit of halacha, and there he has a discussion about kinim, lice. Now, in the Gemara, it says that you are allowed to kill a lice on Shabbat. Why? Because lice are creatures that come out of the sand or out of dust, of filth, and they are not born out of each other. So that is like spontaneous creation. And that was a theory that was, in the time of the Gemara, it was completely legitimate also as a scientific theory. Now, this was discredited. It was discredited. And Lampuranti said, we should be machmir. Now we know that lice do not come out of filth. They come one generation spying out the next generation. So it is asur to kill them on Shabbat. Now, even that caused a strife. And that is in order to be machmir, in order to ban something that up till now was allowed, which is less of a big deal. But Chacham Tzvi wanted to permit something based on scientific evidence. Now, again, he didn't put it like that. He was a very traditional man, and all the proofs he gave were all from Gemara and from Zohar, as I said, about the importance of the heart. But it was clear to everyone that what he really is basing himself on is new biology, is new science. And the rival rabbi, this Moshe Rothenberg, sees this his chance. And he made a whole big machloket out of that. And he says, no, chas v'chalila, we cannot rely on outside sources to make halacha. Halacha must be sovereign. Halacha must be how they say, like self-governing. And it does not need any assistance from the outside. And if you have no good halachic sources about the vitality of the heart, then according to halacha, the heart is not vital. And he made a whole theory, maybe the heart was slightly being eaten by a certain disease. Now, again, we have to remember that they did not have the science that we have now, knowledge we have now. So the theory that this rival rabbi came up with was that maybe the heart was slowly being eaten. So yes, there was a slight remnant of a heart that was functioning in order to allow the chicken to be completely alive and well. And 5 minutes before the chicken was slaughtered, the heart completely ceased to exist. So it is possible that there was no heart and the chicken was treifa and no cat eaten, nothing, as you had a testimony by a witness, right? We need to rely on a witness. That's halacha.
But isn't the woman witness not a witness anyway?
Not in Isur Ve'eter. We all rely on women witnessing all the time in Isur Ve'eter, right? Back then, there were only women in the kitchen. So obviously, everyone relied on testimonials of women for kashrut.
But it still was hypocrite, because when you open the chicken, what rabbis are looking for is they're looking for lungs, they're looking for that. Okay, how do you know what is healthy lung, what is not? It's based on your observations that you got chicken before, and scientifically, you know, okay, black lung, chicken died, or red lung.
So it's a very, very interesting subject, and I would happily go down this rabbit hole but not go up again, never. But questions about treifa and how do we decide what is treifa and not are not from the time of the Chacham Tzvi. They are very ancient, from the time already of the Gemara, because some of what traditionally we call treifa was not seen even by the veterinaries of the ancient world as so traumatic that would really would make it necessary to call it a treifa. And on the other hand, there were certain injuries that they did consider as lethal, and we do not consider as treifa. So our assumption for a very long time is that the status of treifa is a deoraita, is halacha leMoshe miSinai. So it is not scientific. But here the question was not, the Chacham Tzvi was completely willing to agree that being without a heart would make you a treifa. That was not the question. He said that it cannot be that was the situation, because obviously there was a heart and the cat eaten it. That was the debate. Not how to define what is treifa, but how to define what happened, or what was the reality that was there. Now, again, to us it seems very strange, but that was a dispute that ripped apart communities, and the end of it was that the Chacham Tzvi had to retire from his post as a community rabbi. Now, again, it may be that if he was a different man with different, I'm not critical in any way, he's one of Gedolei Israel, so we need to be very, very careful. But as I said, a little more diplomatic, some different attitude. I think that was not a machloket that you needed to break everything the whole help should break loose because of such a machloket. But because the way that he operated, he had his opinion, and his opinion was that the chicken was kasher, and he's not going to back down. So there are 6 or 7 simanim in the Chacham Tzvi. Simanim is like the simanim, answers. Right? So he wrote different answers, and he doubled down. Now we can all think that he was correct, but he doubled down. He didn't want to, to give anything to the other side. So no, you are wrong and not very smart. And okay, and people don't like to hear that. People don't like to hear that. And as I said, the end of the story was, now there were other people also that were angry with him for completely different reasons. I think we spoke about the whole issue of the tzedakah to Eretz Israel last week. Many people were very angry with him for taking the money and trying to collect it and give it in not to the relatives. So people were very angry about that, and they created a coalition against him. And now they didn't have a legal mean to throw him away because he had a position for life. But they made his life so miserable that he decided to retire. And in 1709, so it's about a year later, he retired from Altona, and after a few months, in the beginning he thinks that maybe he would return to the yeshiva, where, as I said, that was his best time, but he couldn't even return to the yeshiva because the situation in Altona was so tense, and it was not nice to be there anymore. It was not fun anymore, and he got an invitation from the Ashkenazi community in Amsterdam to come and be the rabbi. Now, the Ashkenazi community in Amsterdam is a very interesting situation. Amsterdam is in Holland, as you may know, and Holland was a free republic. That is, they had a liberty of religion very early on. Now, it has nothing to do with the Jews, it had to do with the different sects of Christianity, and the Lutheran and the Protestants and the Catholics. And the bottom line was that in Holland, you could be whatever you wanted, and the state would not intervene. It was very important for Sephardic Jews that were conversos in Spain or in Portugal, and now they could just run away, because in all of Christendom, if you became a Christian, that was the end of the story. You are not allowed to return to Yahadut. But there you had the freedom of religion. So you can come there and there is no inquisition. And that, again, we do not understand even for these people. Maybe you can imagine the Soviet Jews that were able to run away. That would be more or less the situation. So they are able to come to Amsterdam, and they found refuge there. And the Sephardic Jews, I think we spoke about Baruch Spinoza and Uriel Di Costa, I mentioned them last week. And so the whole community was like a BT, a Balei Tshuva community, and a very interesting situation, very open to science, very open to the Goyish world, because they were not raised up as Jews, they were raised up as Christians. And their Yahadut came later, in a sense, at least in education. So that was a very interesting situation. Now, as the rabbi, they had a certain guy, the Sephardic situation, named Shlomo HaElyon. Now, he was a very interesting fellow. I would speak more about him in a few minutes. Just remember the name right now. So, Shlomo HaElyon. Now, as time passed, also an Ashkenazi community began to be created, to be gathered, because Amsterdam was very rich because of its liberties. As now we know that liberties has something to do, right, with free market, and there's something to do with being able to express your creativity, and then it was the beginning of capitalism in a way. So it became a very rich place, and also Ashkenazi Jews wanted to, share the celebration. So they also came there. And now, for a long time, they were like the small brother of the big Sephardic community. And the big Sephardic community had greater rabbis, they had more money, they were better organized, so they were everything. And the Ashkenazi were like under their boot. And then the Ashkenazi were able to accumulate enough money and force. Now they wanted to bring their own big rabbi. So they would have a big name that can compete and give them a standing against the Sephardic community. So they would also be something. And who can you bring if not Chacham Tzvi? Chacham Tzvi is well versed in the Sephardic world. He's very well admired by them. He's admired by the Ashkenazic world. Excuse me. And he is free, right? Because he just retired from Altona. So let's invite him. So they invite him, and they send in a missionary to speak with him. And to their surprise, he's beginning to argue about money. And he demands about 10 times what usually rabbis are being paid. But that was for a very good reason. The way rabbis were paid, and that continued to this day in many places, rabbi was giving a very small salary, a hunger salary. You cannot live, you cannot sustain yourself. And he had, if you remember, 10 children. Meaning he had 16, but back then he had 10. So they were giving a very meager sum. And they were supposed, every time they would sit in judgment, so they collect money from the parties. Every time someone would come to sell chametz, they would collect money. Every time there was a behema with a question, they would collect money. Now, you can see why this mechanism was open to corruption. And I'm using understatement. Now, I'm sure that most of the rabbis throughout history were tzaddikim, and they lived in poverty, and they did not abuse their position. But the Chacham Tzvi didn't want such a system. He said, I want to be completely free. I would be paid well, and I would not collect money from any individual. Someone wants to learn with me, it will be for free. Someone has a question, it will be for free. There is a judgment call, I would make it for free. Everything is for free. I am being paid a fixed annual sum. And again, we can appreciate it. The Ashkenazi committee appreciated it slightly less, but in the end, he was able to convince them. They said, fine, we'll give you 3 years pilot, and if you would succeed, you'd be given a contract for life. Okay, and he's coming to Amsterdam, and in the beginning, it looks very good. He comes there, and the first thing he does is his first day. You can imagine. He comes there, and they want to have a big feast for him. So he says, I want to meet the shochet. He meets the shochet, and he checks the knife. He checks the knife. He says the knife, the sakin, is pasul. And he says to the shochet, what do you think about your knife? Look at the knife. Says, I think that the knife is fine. Oh, he's shochet for 40 years. Knife is fine. And Chassid says, please check again. Please check again. After 3 times, and you are out. Says to him, no, you cannot be the shochet anymore of the community. Now, this is a rabbi in his first day on the job. So and that was the end of this shochet. Now you can imagine that the shochet and his family and his friends are not liking the new rabbi. And that was from the first day. His son tells us that. I think I told you that his son is this autobiographical book named Megillat Sefer. And he tells the story. And he says, this is who my father was. He was a man of truth. If the sakin is pasul, and the shochet is not able to differentiate between a kosher knife and a non-kosher knife, then how can you, that's the job of the rabbi, to make sure that the community is eating kosher. Now, again, a different rabbi may be able to strike some deal with the shochet. I would be the one checking the knife from now on. We can think about the way in which you do not lay off the shochet on the first day in the job. But that is just not who he was. He spoke his opinion out. So the shochet was fired. And when the shochet was fired, then you can reform also the whole of the shchita process. Up till then, the shochet would be paid if the behema would be kosher and not be paid if the behema is not kosher. Now, we can all understand the problem in such a scenario because the shochet has a big interest to not say the truth. And we can also understand why it happened that way, because someone is happy to pay if the behema is kosher. He's not able to pay if I lose the behema, which is a lot of money, and I also need to pay the shochet. But it was a very problematic system. So the Chacham Tzvi say from now on, the shochet is also on a fixed salary, and you do not pay any more for shchita, or if you pay the same amount regardless of if the behema is kosher or not. And the money is not going to the shochet, it's going to a big box. And the box is later given to the community, and that is, it's being used for community needs. So there is no direct connection between the person bringing the behema and the shochet. Now, again, this is the Chacham Tzvi 200 years ago, 300 years ago. And you know what? Some of our kashrut systems can, I think, benefit from an approach that would make a disconnection between the owner of the store and the mashgiach. Because we can laugh about their systems, but ours are not. Ours also needs correction. That's what I may say. Okay, so that is how he's beginning with a storm, we may say. Later, still in the first year, there are 2 chazanim. Now, the stories of chazanim and rabbanim was always, for some reason, it's difficult to understand, very complicated. So the chazanim, the cantors, right? So the chazanim would be like the people with the charisma, and people would love them, and many times they would be like, they would be like, prima donnas. Okay, yes, you may say that. So they had a very strong self-importance, and many times they would say, we are the one to call the shots in the shul. So we say how tefillah should look like. We know, we are the chazanim. That's our profession. Now again, you can imagine that a person like the Chacham Tzvi is not going to agree that some chazan would be the one to manage the tefillah. you are singing the tefillah, and that's it. You would sing what we will tell you to sing. And so there were two chazanim. One of them was willing to accept the yoke of the Chacham Tzvi. The other was a very rich man, and it's no way. And the Chacham Tzvi told him, it's either my way or the highway. And the Chacham Tzvi prevailed. That was, the son tells us that here, in order to win, he needed to bring artillery from the Sephardi community. Because in the Ashkenazim, he couldn't completely fire the Chazan that was not following his instructions. But the Sephardim, as I said, also were admiring of him. So they were willing to assist in convincing the Ashkenazim that they should fire the Chazan that was going astray. Fine. Okay, so life are more or less going along. But then someone comes to town, and that's a very big story by itself. Someone coming to town is a fellow named Nehemiah Chayun. Later, he would be called by his enemies Nachash. Nachash is the Rashi Tevot of Nehemiah Chayun Shari. Shari is in itself Rashi Tevot of Shem Reshaim Irkav. The name of the Reshaim should be rotten. So we can understand the level of emotions that are involved here. So this Nehemiah Chayun, who is he? He is a Sabbatian. He is a Mekubal. He works in Kabbalah. He writes books of Kabbalah. And he was a student of Shabtai Tzvi. Not only of Shabtai Tzvi, he was a close disciple of Natan HaAzati. This is the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, he was already excommunicated in almost all of Europe. He also predicted that Shabtai Tzvi is going to reincarnate himself about in 1704, which unfortunately for him didn't happen. So he was in the process of updating his dates. He was still a believer in Shabtai Tzvi. He said instead of 1704, let's speak about 1720. He was not even smart enough to make his predictions long enough into the future, so they would not lie into his face. Anyhow, so he is coming to Amsterdam, which is a free place, right? It's very important. It's very important. It's a free speech place. And he wants to print his books. Now, Chacham Tzvi knows about Sabbatianism because, as we remember, he learned in Sephardic yeshivot, so he's well aware of this problem. And is also assisted by a certain Rabbi Chacham Moshe Chagiz, who is the son of Rabbi Israel Yaakov Chagiz that maybe you remember we spoke about a few weeks ago. He was a Chacham Yerushalmi. And he knew Nehemiah Chayun from his time in Saloniki. He knew the guy. He knew that he's a Sabbatian. So when he is in his way, he's receiving a letter from Rabbi Moshe Chagiz telling him, this Sabbatian is coming to your city, you should block him before entering and maybe manipulating someone. So he is going to Shlomo HaElyon, the rabbi of the Sephardi community, in order to make a united block against this Nehemiah Chayun. To his chagrin and surprise, Shlomo HaElyon does not cooperate. He didn't know it back then. But Shlomo HaElyon was also a crypto Sabbatian. He himself was a follower of Shabtai Tzvi. Not only that, according to the enemies, so you should take it maybe with a grain of salt. But according to Shlomo HaElyon's enemies, Shlomo HaElyon was involved in very problematic parties that were going on among the followers of Shabtai Tzvi. And he, for a certain time, he lived with a wife of another man without, obviously, divorce and the get, until this wife left for a third party, which was deemed more, I don't know, holy in these circles. And so he was a Sabbatian. Back then, at least, for sure, was a Sabbatian. Later, this Shlomo HaElyon went to London, became a rabbi there, and he was thrown away there because he was again exposed as a Sabbatian, and then he came to Amsterdam. So we are not sure if Shlomo Elion was still a Sabbateer, as when he was a rabbi of the Portuguese community in Amsterdam, or maybe he did really repent, but Nehemiah Chayun knew too much about him. He couldn't make Nehemiah Chayun his enemy, just too dangerous. So he needed somehow, Shlomo Elion found himself in a situation that he had somehow to make everyone happy, appease everyone. And he was trying to convince, in the beginning he was trying to convince Chacham Tzvi that it's not the same Nehemiah Chayun that he knew from Saloniki. That's the line he took. And it worked for a week, till Nehemiah Chayun came to town. It was the same man. But it worked for a week. And then after a week, Chacham Tzvi came again to Shlomo and said, no, it's the same man. I know he's a Shabbatian. Why won't we cooperate in order to excommunicate him and throw him out? And then Shlomo said, I want to establish a committee to check the matter. So we would check his works, and you can be a part of the committee. It would be you, me, and another 5 members, all of them Sephardic. Now, obviously, the purpose of Shlomo Elion was to control the other members, and then when there would be a vote, then Chacham Tzvi would be committed because he would be part of the committee, right? So he would be obligated to the decision made by the committee, and they would agree that Nehemiah Chayun is a fine guy and he can print his works. Chacham Tzvi understood where it is going to. Also, Rabbi Moshe Chagiz was informing him about the past of Shlomo Elion. So it was clear to Chacham Tzvi that no good is going to come out of any committee. And he refused to sit in the committee. Instead, he tried, it's a very sad situation, but it's also very funny. So he was trying to get hold of the book that Nehemiah Chayun is going to print in Amsterdam in order to show the problematic paragraphs. No one would sell him the book because they were trying to conceal the book from Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi. So they stole, he and his allies stole the book and they copied it in the night and then returned it back. And then he published a ban on Nehemiah Chayun. The committee went on without Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, Rabbi Chacham Tzvi. Shlomo Elion created the committee, and as they say, make a surprise face. The committee found out that Nehemiah Chayun was a very fine guy and was prosecuted for vain. And the real bad guys are Rabbi Moshe Chagiz and Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, who were excommunicated by the Sephardi community. And it's a very interesting story how Shlomo Elion was able to convince his community to excommunicate the Chacham Tzvi, who was admired, as I say, by them, and they were cooperating with him just a few years ago. It seems that he was playing on 2 themes. One is the Sephardic Ashkenazic gap. He said, if you would agree with the Chacham Tzvi against me, what would be your face? That the Ashkenazi community rabbi would come out as the winner. So even if you do not agree with what I say, for your kavod, you must heed me. And they beat it. They accepted it, and they went with it. So that was one reason. The other reason, also very interesting, has to do with the, as I said, the modern era. He said, there is a free speech. We're in Amsterdam. Everyone is allowed to smoke, actually not to smoke, but to speak. Now it's to smoke. But everyone is allowed to speak his mind. If we would begin to excommunicate one another, who knows what would be the end? Part of why we are able to succeed here is because there is free speech. So that also was a very strong argument. And he was excommunicated. And the Ashkenazim, as I said, that in the end, they were like a stepbrother to the Sephardi community. And when the Sephardi community excommunicated Chacham Tzvi, they went with it also. And Chacham Tzvi had to leave Amsterdam as well. So he was there from 1709 to 1713, so for 4 years. Now, just as I said in the beginning, it was easy for them to get rid. Why? Because, as I said earlier, he had the contract for only 3 years as a pilot. So they were able to fire him and said, we are not renewing the contract. He was extremely disappointed because he knew he's right. And it was like a conspiracy against him. These were crypto Sabbatians. Again, Shlomo Elion, the historians are conflicted if he was a real Sabbatian yet, or maybe he was just looking for his own skin. But it was not out of tzadikut, that is for sure. Nehemiah Hayun was a Shabbatian. There is no question about it. And defending him was a lie. It was just a lie. And all the Rabbanim in Europe knew it. And they were trying to back Chacham Tzvi, but for no avail. And Chacham Tzvi had to leave. And now he was trying to hold to the, can you say, to the corners of the altar? There is such an expression. לקרנות המזבח, he was trying to להאחז בקרנות המזבח. So he was trying to hold, and he was arguing that it was illegal to fire him because they had no real case. And according to the contract, they are allowed not to renew the contract, but they need to give a valid reason. And there was no valid reason because he was an excellent rabbi. So it was very bitter. In the end, Shlomo Elion went to the Goyish authorities and was just moiser, Chacham Tzvi. He said that he is trying to excommunicate people, so he's trying to harm the free speech in our city, and he's causing strifes, and he's a problem, and you should get rid of him. And they put him under arrest for a few months, and then he made a contract with them, made an agreement with them that he would just leave Amsterdam. And that broke his heart. He continued, he had now no community, and he began just to travel in the world. He was invited to England. In London, the Sephardi community really wanted him to become the rabbi, alongside Rabbi David Nieto, who was also very happy. As you remember, he supported Rabbi David Nieto. So Rabbi David Nieto really loved him, and they wanted him to be the rabbi, and they offered a lot of money, and he refused. He refused because it's a very interesting reason. He said, I'm an Ashkenazi. I want my children to be raised up as Ashkenazi. If I would become part of the Sephardi community, then they would get the Sephardic minhagim. So I'm not interested in that. So he refused the offer by the Sephardi community of London. A very interesting story happened there. And that is that, so he was sitting there, they loved him, they came to him with questions. So he sat there for a few weeks. And when they understood they cannot convince him to stay, they said, at least let us take a picture of you, obviously with a drawing of you, in order for us to remember the holiness of your appearance. And he said no, because he believed it's a problem of לא תעשו פסל ומסכה. He believed it's a problem of making the image of man. So what they did was they took a painter with very good memory. He sat down, and he later, so he sat in his lectures and his shiurim and remembered his image, and then went home and drew the picture. And his son tells us that many years later he went to London and he saw the picture. It was so vivid that he thought his father is still standing in front of him. Now the picture, if you would just type Chacham Tzvi on Google and you look for pictures, the picture is available. No, we know the picture. I don't know, at least for me, it doesn't look as, but we are spoiled, right? We have 4K cameras, so we are not looking for realistic drawings anymore. We can just take a picture. But for them, I guess it was a very big thing. And the son, the Yavetz, tells us that they would let people in London, so people would send their own private painters, and they would copy the picture, and the community would take money for the right to copy the picture of the Chacham Tzvi. So I don't know how copywriting worked back then. It sounds that they didn't pay the Chacham Tzvi, right, the money of the rights. But fine. So that was the story of the picture. all of that was in 1714. So in 1713, he was terminated as a rabbi in Amsterdam. In 1714, he visited London, and then he went back to Poland. He said, I want to be an Ashkenazi Jew. I would return to Poland. So he's returning to Poland, and in 70s, again, he's traveling through the world. It's very difficult. As I said, he had the number of children is changing because some of them are getting married, some of them unfortunately dies. But he has always between 10 to 15 or 10 to 12, 13 children with him. So it's very difficult. And his son tells about the difficulties of journeying without a source of income. He's not willing to get gifts. He's not receiving gifts. So it's very difficult, it's extremely difficult. And every time he comes somewhere and people admire him, and then he sees something that he thinks is wrong and he shouts it out, and that's, you can understand. And he's suffering of broken heart, because he feels that he was treated unfairly, unjust in Amsterdam, where he gave his life to instruct the local community. In 1718, he became the Av Beit Din, the rabbi of Lvov in Poland. And he only operated there for 4 months before he passed away. But in these 4 months, he had the time to pick a fight with the local. I'm not saying it in any disrespectful way. I hope that it's understood. He was a huge man. He was a huge personality. And sometimes when you have people that are very, very big and all of us are very small, then it creates sparks. And that's what happened there. So again, he's coming there, and there is a certain parnas that is taking taxes and taking it for himself, and corruption. And he calls spade a spade, and is trying to fire this parnas. Now the parnas was somehow close to the goyim, to the minister of the city and to the local bishop. So he's walking to the local bishop and he's saying, you know, this new rabbi is trouble. And the local bishop is inviting the rabbi in order to hear him, right? So it's a hearing. And the rabbi comes, the Chacham Tzvi comes, but the Chacham Tzvi knows Latin. So he's making a big impression on the bishop. The bishop calls the parnas, calls this rich man, and he says to him, you know, he is the rabbi is one of the most intellectual and learned men that I ever met. You are nothing in comparison to him. So he is able, the Chacham Tzvi is being permitted. So again, for us, it seems not so important maybe, but for them it's very important. So he is being permitted to keep his hat on his head, sitting in presence of the bishop. Now, back then, the minhag was that when there is someone important as the bishop, everyone must take off their hats. Keeping your hat on was a sign of extreme respect. And the Chacham Tzvi was allowed to keep his hat on. And by that, everyone understood that he's close with the bishop, and the parnas was obviously fired. And again, the son is always telling afterwards he died in strange illness, etc., etc., etc. But he was fired. Now the parnas is losing his position in the community, and the Chacham Tzvi is beginning to create a school with a curriculum, as in the Sephardic communities. I think we spoke about the modernization of Torah learning in the Sephardic communities, while in Ashkenazi it was generations back. And he's trying to modernize the school there, but as I said, in 4 months, he passes away in the age of 60, which is young. He accomplished a lot in a short life of 60 years. And when I think about him, and again, he gave us a lot, his response is used to this day a lot. And it was a very important, as you can see, he was also a very important man in the history, our history, because he was bridging between the more traditional world, we may say, and the modern world. But in the end, as many other great people, as Moshe Rabbeinu, he was too great for this world. and he died with a broken heart. And that's it's sad, but I think it's also inspiring to learn about people that were great beyond, and he was one of these people. So with that, we conclude our learning of the Chacham Tzvi, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we continue. The 18th century is full of very interesting and colorful people, rabbis, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we would continue to plow through it next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.